right. Actually going to start with a quick welcome and some announcements as we get more people trickle in. We have an awesome agenda today. Another one of the perks of doing these virtual sessions, pulling people from all over. Today we'll have Robert presenting his UI kit and the work he did in Figma, which is absolutely awesome in case you haven't seen that quite yet. And also Emily talking about accessibility and data experiences. So we're excited for today's meetup and glad that you joined us today. So I am Lucas, one of the co-leads of the Kansas City Tableau user group with Sean, Aaron, and Jay. Glad to be with you guys today. I did want to bring up a few quick things before we kicked off and got started. Number one, if you haven't been following, you should. But TC is back in person. Luckily for this meeting, we are 1 day away from tickets being the official launch for tickets being released. So May 17th through May 19th in Vegas again. Hoping we can get to see a lot of you guys attend. It's going to be fun as always. So if you haven't checked out, please keep an eye. There's information. I'll share it here on the chat in case you don't have the link, but there's cost, days, and everything you need to know about TC this year. And just act out fast. There's not a lot of tickets from what I hear. So once they open, jump on them as soon as you can.
Yep, I think they, yeah. So I knew that I think it's going to be, I don't know if it's in there, but I think they're capping it at 5,000 people. So
yep,
be in there. Yeah, there you go. Lovers. So just if you're interested and can make it happen, definitely jump on there tomorrow, get your tickets as soon as possible. And it's going to be great to be back in person. I'm really looking forward to it.
Good stuff. The other quick announcement I wanted to make, I don't know how many of you saw it, but it's the Tableau Visionary program, I guess now. This used to be called the Zen Masters. It's now been rebranded. So this is a recognition / community that Tableau builds of, I'm not going to say special people, but I'll just read the page and say, for those that demonstrate mastery, teach in the community, and collaborate with others. So that new group has just been announced. And if I scroll down here to my other picture, the big red bubble or dot that you see amidst all of those pictures is our own Sean Miller. So this is the highest accolade one can receive in the Tableau world. So very, very deserved. Wanted to say a quick congratulations to Sean. It's nice to have an insider here within our own community. We have Aaron already with a different Tableau recognition. We have Sean now as a visionary. So it's nice to see our community be active and growing in this space and being recognized for it. So again, Sean, congratulations. If you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas.
Give you a minute.
I appreciate that. Yeah, my big red circle kind of sticks out. I don't know if it was, and it also kind of fits with the whole circle feeling of the visionary now. So, yeah. So, thank you. Extremely grateful and humbled to be a part of it. It's pretty awesome. I'm very excited, and I also mean, to me, what it means to me is not only is it a recognition of past, but it's also an expectation of the future. And so with this, nothing, only good things are coming. I got some exciting stuff. So, just quick things. If you're interested, if you do Workout Wednesday, I'm also a Workout Wednesday coach. So I also do all the challenges. And this year I've started live streaming, building the actual challenges from myself and all of the other coaches. So it's a really great way. So it's usually on Thursday afternoons around lunchtime for us here in Kansas City. So if you see those Workout Wednesday challenges and you're not really sure how to even go about approaching them, I highly encourage you to join the live stream every Thursday around 12:15. You can check out my YouTube channel and get to see how I approach Tableau challenges and see how I fail and see how I get out of those failures and how I approach different problems, which is really cool. And this is live blind building, except for the challenges that I do. But so the challenges by the other coaches, I haven't looked at. I haven't, I haven't pre-done them at all. It's kind of me doing it on the fly. So it's a really fun way to interact with the community and show off that. So definitely check that out as well. So, but thank you, Lucas, for the recognition, and thank you to the community. It's pretty awesome. So I think we might be planning a little get together in April to celebrate. So it'll be fun. So more on that later. But
Yep, exactly. So we'll share more details on that. As far as next meetup, I know we've been trying to meet on a month-to-month cadence. We are taking a quick pause for April. Our next meetup will be May 2nd. Same time, 1 p.m., a little bit different than what we've been used to have, starting at 2 p.m. Central, but we'll send more information when that comes. The last note I wanted to make here within the visionary team is just so nice to see with the whole remote possibility with this meeting, that we've been able to get so many of these speakers already. Now, Sean just added to the team. We've had Zach before. We have Kevin going to speak to us in a couple months as a request from the community. There's so many that have been requested and some that we've had the honor of hearing from. So great stuff that this whole remote opportunity brought for us. With that said, I want to welcome Robert and turn it over to him so he can demonstrate all the awesome work he put together with the Tableau UI Kit. Robert, go ahead.
Thanks, Lucas. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen here. Everyone see that?
Yep, we're good. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks. So today we're going to be talking about prototyping and the Tableau UI Kit. My name is Robert Janezic. I'm a user interface designer at JP Morgan Chase. I do have a slide here on that, but quick topics. Who am I? We're going to talk about prototyping, the Tableau UI Kit, and I want most of this to be a demo. I don't really want to just sit here and show slides, because we really got to jump into the kit. So quick who I am. My name is Robert Janzek. I'm a user interface designer at JP Morgan Chase, where I design websites and applications for our 150,000 plus Tableau user base. Previously, I was an analyst for years, right? Like I was in teams, creating business reports and analytic solutions and things like that. But I have moved 100% full-time into design, and that has more to do with building applications and websites. And 99% of my time is in Figma now, but I'm still very active in the Tableau community. I'm trying to figure out solutions and just how to make analysts better designers, whether that be creating products and tools or blogs and things like that. So before we can actually talk about the Tableau UI Kit, we need to talk about what prototyping is in general. And I feel like there's a general understanding in the community about what it is, because there's been a big kind of craving after I put out the kit for people looking for prototyping solutions and wanting to integrate it into their own process. So prototyping, it's a close replica of what the end result of a product will look like. They incorporate most of the final UI design and interaction that the finished product will have. So in terms of Tableau, you can think of it as, just creating what the actual dashboard would look like, specifically design-wise, before you actually start implementing it into an end, product like Tableau, for example. And this happens in all companies when it comes to application and web design, right? Like, devs and engineers aren't the ones designing it. You have designers that create it in a prototyping tool like Figma, and then you hand it over to the devs or engineers and they actually code it, for example. In this example, it's just Tableau, right? It's not in code specifically. So what are some main benefits of prototyping from my point of view? And there's a lot of them, but these are my favorite ones, especially when talking about prototyping with Tableau specifically. The benefits that you would probably have for web design and applications might be slightly different. But for Tableau, there's a few big ones, right? Avoiding tech. So there's no data cleansing. You don't have to worry about calculations. There's no niche hacks, because we know there's 1,000 of those. You don't have to worry about those. Anything server related, potentially clunky design functionality. And, in my opinion, Tableau is an analytics and data visualization tool. It's not necessarily a design first focused tool, right? So the way that I think about it, designing in something like Figma, analytics and data visualization in Tableau just makes sense to me, especially. So just better quality. I find that the prototypes that you come up with, the end result is just better because you can conduct things like usability testing, and you can check that it follows correct design and data visualization concepts. And you can do more complicated things like, dashboard navigation, for example. You don't really have to worry about the functionality in Tableau. You just put some text and it's basically the concept of navigation. So you can sit down with your teammates and your key stakeholders and say, hey, does this, do these follow best practices? Does this navigation look all right? Things like that. Lower costs. And when I mean lower costs, I don't necessarily mean, the actual dollar amount, although that can come into it. Lower costs in terms of the time-wise, I would say. So iteration at the design level is much less costly than it is at the development level. And, I see this all the time where, let's say, for example, you're going straight from gathering requirements to code or going to something like Tableau. If you're not focusing on design at all, what usually happens is the engineer will design it, and then probably a month later, you'll realize that no one's using it, and you're trying to determine why that is. And a lot of the times the answer is you're not getting the right requirements. But in my head, one of the biggest things for people not using your product is because either it's difficult to use, and it's not designed well. And there's a lot of statistics that I could throw out that show, especially for websites, that design is a major factor in people sticking to the thing that you've created and actually looking through it. And you can just look up those stats for yourself. In terms of feasibility is a big one. So a good example of this is I was working at a startup, my last company, and we wanted to create a multi-level Sankey, and we didn't really know if we could do that. So we prototyped it first, and we discussed with the designer and the data engineer that would actually be creating that in the database. Is this possible to get the data structure correct? And we had multiple conversations back and forth, and we came to the conclusion that, yeah, it is possible. There's a lot of scenarios where, people will go straight from gathering requirements to the end result, and the things that they want to create, they'll probably spend a couple of days, and then at the end of the third day, they'll be like, oh, or fourth day, they'll realize like, well, we actually can't create this, or it's not worth the time. Whereas if you just prototyped it and you had those conversations beforehand, you could have saved a lot of time. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes, especially when it comes to whether it be prototyping or design in general. If you think good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. And I see this all the time. People, they'll tell me, we're potentially concerned about using too much time prototyping it first before we could just go into Tableau. And I see this thing all the time where the amount of time in the end, whether it's like a year or 2 years down the line, the amount of time you spend in those 2 years far exceeds what the time you would have spent if you just prototyped it first. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the times you'll just go straight from gathering requirements to creating it in Tableau. And then you realize a month down the line, well, actually, the design isn't what we want it to be, and there's a lot of things wrong. So we should have just spent the time, designing it either perfectly or making it look really great on the front end, and then we could have saved engineering time at the end. Cool. So we know what prototyping is. Now we can move into the Tableau UI Kit, which is a tool that I created in Figma. And I do want to preface that I am not affiliated with Tableau or Figma, and this is all a side project, just to get that out of the way. So what is it? Before you can actually understand that, you need to know what a UI kit is. And the UI kit, very popular in the design world. It's a collection of assets that contain a set of design elements, such as UI components and styles. And I'm sure a lot of people in the Tableau world necessarily aren't that familiar with it, just because Tableau doesn't have that functionality, right? They don't have like reusable components and parts that you can just plug into your Tableau dashboards, although that would be amazing, right? Like some sort of built-in design system type of thing. Not there yet, but hopefully maybe sometime in the future, that would be great. So the Tableau UI Kit is a kit built in Figma that allows users to rapidly prototype Tableau dashboards, and you can stick to brand guidelines while doing so. And that was a big piece of this. It's not just the components, it's that a team can take this UI kit, put their own branding on top of it, and then have their own customized components that you can use. So what are some main benefits of the Tableau UI Kit? So consistency is a big one, and you can feel at ease knowing that developers will design consistently for all Tableau dashboards going forward. Let's say, for example, you have the kit, you have 3 developers that are developing a prototype. You'll feel confident and know that they're going to use the standards that your team and your firm have set because of the way the UI Kit works, right? Customization, this was a big one because I know there's no possible way that I could get every single thing a team ever would want for the dashboards, but I stuck to the main things in V1, right? I'm working on version 1.5 now. But this is not a one and done type thing, right? It's just going to consistently be added on top of. So customization, default, not what you want, that's all right. You can use the variance, which is a feature in Figma for more fine tuning. And I'll kind of show that. So one-to-one, this is also a big one because people have come to me saying, you know, we don't want to prototype because we're afraid that it's not going to look exactly like Tableau. And is a legitimate concern, right? You don't want to show someone a prototype and they're like, oh, well, what tool is this? Now you can feel confident that your prototypes will look exactly like Tableau. I took an image, I took a screenshot of every single Tableau UI in Tableau Desktop, and I matched it one-to-one in Figma, so it looks exactly the same. It's almost imperceivable. Simplicity. You know, Tableau has simple drag and drop functionality. And I wanted that same type of thing for the UI kit, right? You just drag and drop the chart that you want and then customize it. So you can really make anything as large or small as you like. And I'll kind of show you that in a little bit. So we're getting close to the demo here, but I do want to throw out some stats, and this might not mean a lot, right? Because it's Figma and not Tableau, but 1,100 plus components and variants, that's a lot. And I'll show you those in a little bit. 1,000 plus styles, so you can choose, you know, what palette you want, and you can make as many customization options with the styles as you like. And then 2,200 plus dashboard layouts. So you can feel confident that almost in all scenarios, if you're creating a dashboard using the kit, you'll find something that fits your layout. Now let's jump to the demo. This thing is in the way. Okay, so this is the Tableau UI kit. When you open it, this is what you're going to see. This is kind of just like a welcome, and this is not going to be a Figma tutorial. It's just going to be kind of showing you the different pages that are here and what the Tableau UI kit can do, right? So this is just a welcome page. It's just saying, who am I? What is this about? Why did I decide to do this, et cetera, et cetera. Some information at the bottom. And on the left-hand side here, these are the pages in the Figma world. This is, you know, pages. You just go to different sections. So this is getting started, and this kind of talks about, you know, giving you a primer about what is a UI kit, what is atomic design, because that kind of is what this system is going off of, right? The idea of you're creating small, extremely small components, you combine the small components together and you get something larger. And I'll give examples of that. It talks about Figma specific things like what are components and what are component variants, and then what are styles. I have how-to videos, so I created 6 different videos if you need some extra context on how to do things like file navigation, using components, variants, how do I build a dashboard, icons, and styles. And then this styles page, so this is an explanation of, let me zoom out, how to change styles in the cheat sheet. So the cheat sheet is really important, especially, when a team or a firm is looking to use the UI kit. It's the idea of documenting all of your minute design decisions. Now, why is that important? You could say that's a potential waste of time. And my argument to that is a lot of times when people are building Tableau dashboards, a developer, will say, hey, I have the general design layout for our stuff, but like, what is the font sizing, the font weight, and like the font color of an axis on this type of chart, right? It gets that specific. So over time, a developer, if that one decision to figure out what they were going to choose on that axis title took 10, 15 seconds, you can just imagine that those 10 to 15 seconds add up over time. And if you have specific documentation about what they should be, there's really no confusion about the minutia of the design. They're really focused on actionable insights. Really, that's kind of the name of the game. So I have things like axis, what is the title, tick text, axis ruler, we have labels, we have like what's a chart title, cells, legends, highlighters, parameters. You can see that it gets very specific, but just know it's great that a developer can come to this and say, hey, I actually do know the exact thing our team should be using, right? And this just documents all of those. So these are palettes. So the far left, these are just the Tableau default palettes. We have Color Brewer, which is more like for mapping. We have Tailwind, which is probably my favorite color palettes. These are super great for user interface design. And then we have Variance. And these are great because, let's say, for example, you're a smaller team and you don't really have brand guidelines. You kind of have things to go off of, right? Like you could say, we don't actually know what color to use for this. Let's look what colors are here, and we can just go to this. We have examples that give you quick examples about what you can do with the kit. Scratchpad, which is just, showing example. Scratchpad is just for you to play around with, right? Like there's nothing in there. And this is where we get to the actual components. So we have things like atoms, which are small components that are added up into other components. We have line charts, bar charts, pie, scatter, table, and KPI. And then this is where we get into the Tableau user interfaces. So we have things like your filters, and these look exactly the same as Tableau. We have all of these. We have parameters. You can see all those examples, tooltips. We have other for things like highlighter, legend, dimension, measure, and we have pages. This last section is for dashboard specifically, right? So this is the section where you're going to actually start looking at the components that can make up a dashboard, right? So we have the main dashboard component, and then these are the layouts for it. We have a footer, paragraph, title, KPI filter stacks, icons. This is the last section, which is just kind of miscellaneous, change log, license agreement, and then cover. So let's just jump into it. Let's start creating something. So for this example, I want to create a bar chart. Now, generally, you would have to do that by hand. You would have to worry about advanced features such as auto layout, constraints, framing, and making sure that that all works seamlessly. And I can promise you it takes a long time to figure out all those things and have it work perfectly. So in this example, you can see that I just went to the Assets tab in the top left. I go to Bar Chart. I just drag and drop a chart, and just like that, you get a great looking bar chart. And not only that, you can take it, you can extend it, make it larger, make it smaller. You can see that everything scales 1-to-1 exactly like Tableau. And I know that to be true because I matched it 1-to-1 with Tableau, making sure, the white space between the bars gets bigger as you make it taller, and it gets less as you make it smaller. So small things like that add up to making it seem very, very close and similar to Tableau. So for this example, we're going to use variance. And variance, you could see in the far right section here, we have a title variant. So if I click title, title's gone. If I click it again, it's there again. And I'll explain it in a second, but we want to start creating a custom bar chart. So for this example, we'll keep a title. We click in once. You can see there's a bunch of options here, right? We have orientation, dimension, measure. For this example, I want a vertical bar chart. We don't want the dimension axis, but we do want the measure axis. And we also want to color the bars dependent on min or max. So we want the min and max to be this dark blue, but we want everything else to be a light gray. How would you do that? So you can just hold Control and Shift. You can just quickly go into these and you can pick from the style. And this is where the styles come into play, right? So if you can see my cursor here, we're currently using the palettes Tailwind Blue 5, but we could go to like a Tailwind palette, like a light gray here. That looks pretty good. So now we don't want labels for anything other than the min and max. And this is where, the smaller and smaller components really come into play. So if I click in a good amount until we get to the specific bars, we can click on the bars and you can see that all of these bars have different variants as well. Like what should the length of the bar be? Should there be dividers? In this example, we want to get rid of bar labels. So we could say none. And just like that, we get a bar chart that's completely responsive. Let's do another example. Let's jump to like scatter plot. We could throw in scatter plot. We could say we don't want a title. Do we want y-axis, x-axis? We don't want a y-axis label, and we don't want the x-axis, but we need to make some adjustments to the dots. We want the dots to be colored dark, and we want them to be sized, right? So you could say that in Tableau, this could be, using the profit measure on the size, using profit or sales on size. So that's a good example of that. I do want to spend a good amount of time on actually creating a dashboard, but I do want to quickly talk about variance real quickly. You'll notice earlier, for example, that when I was working on the bar chart, the variant is title on or off. And how does that work? I think it'd be important to quickly show. So if I go to bar chart, you can see that all of these are components, right? So this is a component, that's a component, that's a component, but the things within them are variants. So your two variants for the bar chart at the highest level are bar chart title on, yes, title off, no, right? And the same things apply for all of these. You can see that when I'm selecting these things, I have different naming for each of them. So they have unique variants. So you can see how this kind of works with atomic design, right? You create smaller and smaller components. You add the components together, and then your end result, your largest component bar chart, has a ton of different options. So you can see how this can propagate through all of the different components. So let's actually create a dashboard. So we could go to assets, we could type in dashboard, throw that in, and just like that, you get a great looking dashboard, but there's no content in it, right? You need to figure out your layout first. Let me move this up. So for this example, I want a title. You can see the variance here. Title, yes or no. Filters and KPIs. Do we want a left, right, top, none? We'll keep it left for now. And do we want a footer, yes or no? So for this example, I want to create, like a profit dashboard or something like that. So we can go into the component for the dashboard title. So we can double click. and you get all the options for the dashboard title. And a lot of times when you're creating Tableau dashboards, you know, if it's more and you're trying to link them, you'll have like breadcrumbs, right? Like home and then like profit details or something like that. So you can see what happens here when I'm clicking all of these different options. You can see that it's adding all of these things. So for this example, I want breadcrumbs. I can just hide these. I can start creating the dashboard. Like this could be home. This could be profit breakdown or something like that. This could be breakdown. We could have a subtitle. This is something. Cool, where title is done. Now let's move to the next thing. So for the KPIs, we could do, this could be filters. Applies to entire dashboard or something like that, so the user understands. And then we need to start hiding these. You don't need all of them, so you can just click into the ones you don't want. You can hide those. Go back one, hide that. And I do want to show the user what a dropdown would look like for this specific option. So we could just call this region. Actually, let me go back one. And we can say, I want a dropdown. And I think it's kind of nice to have the ability to show the users maybe some of the data points that'll be there, or just have them understand what this filter will do. So this could be region. This could be north, south, west. That could be your region filter. And now we need to start adding content. And there's a few ways to do this. You know, if you watch the video for how to create a dashboard in the how-to video section, you'll know how the different ways you can create it. But I'm going to, you know, do the simplest thing that I think most people would probably do. So for this specific example, I need to choose a layout for this swap component, right? So how would you do that? The best way to figure out what different layouts there are is to go to the dashboard section and start looking at the layouts. So you can see here that the atoms, this content component, there's, you know, horizontal or rows, there's, you know, columns, and these are just, you know, stacked on top of each other, stacked next to each other. But these ones here are completely randomized, right? Like these are just random layouts because there's no possible way for me to know, you know, what layouts are people going to use. So what you would do is you would put the dashboard component on, you would pick your layout. So for this specific example, I think this would work out for my prototype. And how would you take this and move it to that other area? Well, you're not actually moving it, you're just taking note of what it's called, right? So it's called random 13. You can see the variant name on the right. It's called random 13. So if I go back to my Scratchpad and I get back down to the swap component, basically what I'm saying is, hey, take this variant and swap it out with something else. So I said it was called random 13. And just like that, you get the layout that you chose in the dashboard section. So now you're saying, all right, well, you know, how do we take this and move it into that? Now, when I first gave this to people, they did try to just take a chart that they created and just drag it in, but that's not really how it works. There's some ways to get around that, but what you would really do is get down, just hold Control. You would click the areas that you want to swap out with like a chart. For example, I want 2 bar charts and a scatter plot. So I would hold Control and Shift, click those. Now you can see something here, it's called Replace Me. Now this isn't swapping out a variant, you're basically just changing the component. So Replace Me is a component and I want to switch it out with the bar chart component, which is what I just explained earlier. So I can hit Replace Me, I can type in bar chart, just like that. You can click bar chart and it automatically puts it in and it scales it to the area. Now for this example, I want a scatter plot. I can say scatter plot. And you see just like that, it automatically takes the area of the layout you selected and puts in the chart that you want. And even, you know, even more cool, I think, is that you can take the entire dashboard and move it and make it as small as you want, and everything scales perfectly, right? It scales to how big you want it. You're not really trapped in to the monotony of, you know, having to do things by hand. Now it applies the exactly same what we did before. Now you can go into your actual bar chart component and you can start switching things. Like, do you want a title? Do you want a dimension? Do you want to make them vertical? You can see how this works, right? You just swap components in and out for each other, and then you just make the adjustments. Now let's look at the footer here, because I requested on Twitter, what people use the footer for, and I think it's mostly informational, right? Like it's, when was the last time it was refreshed? Who was the main developer? So for this specific example, I want to say this was last refreshed, say at 2:13 p.m. or something like that. And you probably want some sort of icon with it, right? So if you click on this little icon here and you go to your icon, you can swap out the icons. And remember earlier I mentioned the icons page. Now this is where the material design icons come into play. You can look through any of these and say which one would apply the most. Maybe something like this. So what is this icon called? It's called alarm or something like that. So if we wanted to put the alarm component image icon into here, we would just click on this, go to image, and just type in alarm. Click that, and just like that, it swaps it in. Now you can see that a lot of times I'm just swapping things in and out, and that's kind of how it works, right? It's the idea of getting rid of as many manual things as possible, that you can just swap things in and out. So yeah, that was an example of building a dashboard from scratch, and this is a pretty simple example. But if you go through all of these, you can see like the KPI one alone has, I think, this has 192 different variants. So you can really create any KPI that you want, right? And you can add, the different icons and, is it up? Is it down? Do you want an image? Where should the image be? Do you want an action section? So you can see how this works, right? And I quickly want to show how a team or person would take this and customize it to their own brand guidelines. So let's say, for example, your team likes to use red titles for all of your filters. How would it work to say, hey, let's change a style in this so that all of the filter titles are turned red, so that when I go to assets and someone drags a title or someone drags a filter in, it's red? How would that work? All you have to do is click on the title and look at the name of the style. So it's saying, hey, this is Tableau user interfaces filters, and this is the title style. How would you change that? So you can click off here, you can go to filters title, and you can see there is an option here where you can switch things up, right? So for this example, I want to change it to red. Now watch what happens when I change it to red. I'll do this and go all the way over here. You can see that changing that one style propagates through all of the titles, all of the filters components that have that style applied to it. Now you can see how this applies, right? Like your team can go through all of the styles that are in the Tableau UI kit, change them to your liking, so that when you drag in a component, for example, if I go to filters, go back here, actually, let me just look for it. So filters, and I say, I want a date filter, right? So the browse periods filter. When you drag it in, it automatically has that style already applied. So I think that's important to see, that you can just go through, change your styles, and everything just propagates throughout the entire kit. So that's kind of all I have. I showed you, advantages of prototypes and benefits of the UI kit. I showed you the navigation throughout the kit. I showed you, how to create specific charts, how to create a dashboard, and then even how to change up the styles to your own team's likings. So that's it from there. I'll say that here's this. over here. Yes, I am using Figma for creating the PowerPoint. So you can visit tableauuikit.com if you're interested. My Twitter is @RobertJanezic. If you have questions on anything, whether it's design specifically or the UI kit, you can email me here. And then this is, just the website if interested. Really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. Always happy to talk about this type of stuff. Oh, and any questions? I'm not sure.
I think
No,
there
this
a
was,
question that came. Go ahead, Sean.
No, go ahead, Lucas. You go.
I was looking up the chat. I think there was a question that came up as far as colorblind palettes, but I think Emily jumped on that one. I believe you've included that as well, right? Robert, given all the elements you had.
Yeah, so if I go back to the kit, go to palettes, really, the ones that I would probably use, they always, whatever the default ones are for Tableau. And the good point is you can always add your own palettes, right? Like if there's a specific set of palettes you want to use, you can just add them here and just create your own styles so that when, you're creating new components or you're changing some styles, you can just use those new palettes. This is made to very much be expanded on for your specific team, but it gets you like 90% of the way there. It's kind of a very good base to just getting either whether you're really experienced with prototyping or you're kind of trying to take things to the next level, I would say. You have the ability to expand it as much as possible.
I think the one question I had for you, Robert, and I was talking to a coworker here during your presentation, was how many late nights did it involve creating this whole solution?
It took me about 6 months to create. A lot of it being extremely monotonous work, right? Like creating these filters, I just straight up had to take screenshots. Like I would go into Tableau and then I would just use the Superstore data and just put a quick filter in and then just see how that quick filter actually reacts. Like how much white space is between the words and the edge. Like I'd never thought about I never thought about that before I started creating this. So, a long time, a lot of monotonous work. So yeah.
This is great, man. I can't wait to start using it. Sean, I think you were going to say something, so I'll give
No,
it
I
back
was
to you
just
before we
I
go
was
on
just
to
gonna
Emily.
kind of echo what you were saying, that I think this is a really cool thing that I think a lot of people who maybe want to up the level of their designs and do a lot of this upfront work ahead of time, so that we're not always having to because I can imagine, because I've been through, not imagine, I know because I've been through it, is the scope creep that happens when you're building something out, and it's like, well, we talked about this, and if you don't have a set document that everybody agrees upon at the beginning, then it's kind of an open book for people to kind of rewrite the requirements. But so I would just kind of really encourage, even if there are multiple different ways of going about this. I think this is a really great, awesome solution. But I think at the very end of the day, I think one thing that Robert's done really well here is shown the value of putting together prototypes as early as possible in the process of designing. So regardless of how big or small your company is, there's absolutely an added benefit to doing something like this. So so have you been using this at JP Morgan Chase?
We have not implemented it yet. We will though, right? Like getting it across all these different teams and making sure we do it in the right ways, pretty big undertaking. So it's not something we've done yet, but I created it. So we could definitely just implement it really
Right.
whenever you want. So,
Cool.
but yeah, the scope creep is a big one, right? Like if you actually have a physical thing people can see and you get key stakeholder sign off, and even going as far as saying, hey, you go in and you actually sign it in Figma, let's say, for example, and you get the key stakeholder sign off. At the very end, when they're pushed back on stuff, you can say, hey, remember, you legitimately went into Figma and signed off on this prototype. So we cannot implement these additional features that would potentially take a month or so. So yeah, that's another great thing that that you brought up.
Yep. I mean, it all kind of ties into the, you can really, for companies who kind of follow an agile process, I can see how this could really be beneficial because, you're doing a lot of the legwork up front, and then it's like, okay, we can do this amount of work in 2 weeks, and this is what we're going to go do. And if you want to do anything else, we got to put it in the backlog, right? So that's a big one. So great stuff.
Yeah, appreciate it. And one last point, I think people think since I created this, I expect them to like prototype everything always. That's just not the case, right? The way that I look at prototyping and deciding of whether or not you should prototype is kind of on a scale. So on the far left here, you have like just a table with like 100 rows or something, and you're just throwing it on the server to get some information. And then on the far right, you have like a 20 dashboard project that has like breadcrumbs, and you have all these advanced things. I'd say it's like somewhere to the middle left, right? So it's like here where you're starting to get into more like complicated, potentially dashboard, and a lot of people are going to be seeing it. You should absolutely spend the time to prototype, get feedback, iterate, get sign off. But if you're just like creating a dashboard that's for like 2 people and it's just like a table, no, you don't need to prototype. So yeah, just a quick reminder on kind of when you should or should not be prototyping.
Yep.
Cool.
That's great. Really appreciate it, Robert.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thanks for taking the time to share this with us. I will now pass it along to Emily. Take it away.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so I am talking about tips for creating more accessible data visualizations or data experiences. I will admit, after reading that title again, I was like, that's not the catchiest thing, but it does describe what I'm going to be talking about today. So before we get into content, who am I? Because I don't know if all of you know me. So here's a nice little word cloud, although there is an issue with this word cloud. And so I would love it if you could put it in the chat what the issue is or what you think the issue is with this word cloud. But yeah, it sums up who I am, which I don't usually use word clouds a lot, but I was like, let's be fun today. So I'm a mom. I've got 2 awesome kids, 14 and 11. So we're heading into like high school and middle school here, which is crazy. I speak, I'm a podcaster, a data leader, Tableau ambassador. I'm an advisory board member for the Data Leadership Collaborative. I used to be a bank examiner for 18 years, which actually gives me a really great background in how I analyze, how I do analysis. I'm a business owner, impact maker, fibromyalgia. I'm a model part-time and a pageant queen. So there's a little bit of everything. I think if I had to sum myself up, I'm a collector of experiences. So that is me. Now we got who I am out of the way. Let's chat about accessibility. So what is it? It is making the experience available to as many people as possible. That's kind of my definition of it, because I don't know that you'll have like a fully accessible data experience for everyone, because we're all different and we have different needs. Before I go on, I don't define it in here, but I'll use like data visualization, dashboards, and data experiences interchangeably. With data visualizations, you're really focusing on the visual aspect, which a lot of people have fine vision and can read these visualizations, but for some people they can't. So it's really an experience then. So I've tried to adopt more of the data experience, but you may hear it slip out where it's data viz or data visualization. So I think that when I step back and I think about creating accessible dashboards, and this idea of having as many people as possible experience it, I think that that's actually a really good question to ask ourselves as we're developing these dashboards. And if you know the answer is no, then maybe you should go back. So that's something that as I was reflecting on, I thought, oh, that's just a really good question to ask ourselves. But why should you do visual, or why should you do accessibility? Why should you incorporate it into your design process or your development process? So I want you to imagine somebody who you love, who can't read the words, they can't make out the colors, and they are so frustrated, like crying. That was my daughter, who has in a ton of ADHD and dyslexia. She was reading, so reading is difficult for her anyway. And then she was reading a story, and she was breaking down in tears. Oh, let me share my video. I realized I forgot. So she is breaking down in tears because the L's and the I's look the same. And it was so upsetting because I'm like, the girl has issues anyway with trying to read. Like she's got to like do that flipping of the letters in her head. And it was an Arial font. And the capital I and the L look the same. And she was like, why do they have to make it look that way? She was so upset and so frustrated on something that was hard for her anyway. And if you are a parent or are close to people with kids, you know that feeling of like, you want to do anything that you can to help them. And so that is what I think about. That's part of my why and why I talk about accessibility. But I think about, wouldn't I want somebody who I love or who I care about be able to have the same or similar experience as somebody else? And just because they have dyslexia or ADHD or have vision, that their vision's going, does that make them less important? Shouldn't they have that same or similar experience? So for me, that's my why, and I carry that forward. But you might be thinking, but Emily, that's cool for like personal stuff, but I'm at work and I don't know, maybe you don't care about the people at work the way you do your family. Totally valid. So here I've put together 3 reasons, your work why. One is that key decision makers in your audience may need an accessible data experience, and you don't know. If you do any data visualization or data experience work with the federal government, it's actually required under Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And generally, it's just the right thing to do. So those are 3 reasons, in addition to having your loved one or somebody you care about have a good experience with data. So I want to talk a little bit about exclusions. And I think it's more than what you might think it is. So I've kind of put them into 2 buckets. There's the type. So it's sight, where they might be blind or colorblind. I think in data visualization, people tend to go to those 2 first, but it's way more than that. It's the decreasing sight, the ability to, like, you can't distinguish between the background and the foreground. So it's sight, there's sound. We're not going to talk about, or I'm not going to talk about that too much here because that doesn't tend to pop up as much in data visualizations or experiences. There's dexterity and comprehension. And then there's this time element. When I learned about the time element, and when I really thought about it in addition to the types, it kind of blew my mind in terms of thinking about this, what I thought was a small population of people who needed accessible data experiences to then like, really, I saw it just multiply out. And here's the example. So you have situational, temporary, and permanent. So situational, so like with the fibromyalgia, my fingers can get stuck in a position. It's actually like really scary because sometimes I have to use my iPad to like unbend my fingers sometimes. And I feel like I might break them. There are sometimes where I'm like, I hope I didn't just break my finger. But it doesn't happen all the time. And you can see now, like it just hurts a little bit, but I can move my hands. So it's very situational for me. Then we have my son, Alex, who is in a cast because he fractured his hand. And he's got 2 more weeks in his cast and then 3 more weeks in buddy tape. And then he'll be good as new. So that's permanent. And then you have somebody who might not have a hand or might not have an arm, and that's permanent. So if you think about those situational and temporary considerations as well, like think about not just people who have fibromyalgia, but situational where maybe somebody's carrying a baby or carrying something, and then it stops. So you have those elements that really keep expanding this need for accessibility. So here's some design considerations. To help you design with accessibility in mind, I think the first thing that people need to do is know and learn about your audience. This is so huge. Like I am such a know your audience type of person. So we're going to dive into that a little bit. And then recognize exclusions. And here comes this concept of like solving for one, extending to many. We'll chat about that. Being consistent with your conventions, providing choice, and prioritizing content. So knowing and learning about your audience. It's really more than just a requirements gathering exercise. So you want to know how they plan to interact with the dashboard. And we'll just use dashboards as the example here. And that'll help you learn how to design it initially. I'm actually taking this human-computer interaction course from the Interaction Design Foundation. And there was the professor, Alan Dix is his name. And in the class, he was saying, you have to think about the interactions within the thing you're developing. So the interactions within the dashboard, but then you have to think about the interaction, like that's just one interaction that they have for their process. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah. So there's the interactions in the dashboard, but then the dashboard itself is part of a bigger process. And that might be using the dashboard in a meeting to have some conversation or to, make some decisions. Just being at your desk and knowing, learning more about what's going on. So I thought that was really interesting. And that just really helps you learn your audience even more to help you design it so that way it's a successful dashboard. And then I think that there's this aspect of getting feedback. And I've put like 3 different ways that you could get feedback. So you've prototyped it, whether you use the Tableau UI Kit or something else. You've prototyped it, you've built it, you go get feedback, and you can do this together with them. And this really a really great way of getting feedback is side by side or together so that you can observe their interactions. Like you just give them an objective, like tell me how you would find the detail, or tell me how you would do X. And they would do it. And then you would look at, is that the way that I intended them to do that? So you get feedback through that side by side or observations. You could get asynchronous. So give them the dashboard and have them share feedback. Not as great sometimes because you may miss some of those patterns, the way that they got there, depending on how well that person is with documenting what they did. And then another way that you could get feedback is more automated, where you can implement tagging or tracking software to see where they click. And that may help you as well. And that just sounds like good data visualization, like we should get that anyway. But knowing about your audience, learning about them, if they come back to you during this feedback and they're like, wow, you know what, like you used 9-point font and I can't read it. So that would help you understand, okay, I've got people who really need me to increase the font size. Or, you know what, you're using Arial, which has imposter letters. That's the capital I&L. And so then you might make a choice to use Verdana. So those are all good. That's all good information for you to then help you create a dashboard that's going to be to meet their needs. And one thing I want to point out, it's not in the slides, but I think it's interesting because I hear people who are accessibility experts, and I consider myself an accessibility advocate. Like I love talking about it. I'm curious about it. I try to promote it, but I don't feel like I'm the expert. But I hear accessibility experts say you should get people with those disabilities or with those needs included in your in the initial part of your development. And I feel like that's like pie in the sky because one that assumes that you have a culture of accessibility and inclusivity and that people feel safe in raising their hand to say, I have fibromyalgia or I have ADHD. And in some cases, people aren't going to raise their hand saying that they have something because they may not themselves even know that they have it. There's a big conversation right now about on social media about how ADHD has been missed in women, actually of my age, because it just didn't present itself the way that it has in men. And also that time period, like it just wasn't a thing that was diagnosed. So you may have people who don't even know that they are that person. So I think instead of going that approach of, raise your hand if you have a disability, I think it's just really useful to just get your audience in, because whether they know they have a disability or that they need that assistance, it doesn't matter because you're solving for them and they're part of your audience. So you don't have to put a label on them. All right. So this solve for one, extend to many concept, I love it. I call it the curb cutting your dashboard. If you know of curb cuts, they're the little dips in the sidewalk, and they were originally meant for people like with wheelchairs to be able to easily like cross the street. And now, it extends beyond wheelchairs. It extends to people on bicycles, mothers or fathers with strollers. So you've solved for that one group, but it's other people have benefited, like closed captioning now. That's amazing to me because it's not just people who have hearing issues, but I've totally been in the room with my family and put closed captioning on in order to study some material, and I didn't want to disturb them. Well, so I could kind of be around them, but not disturb them. Like that's extending the benefit to me. So here's an example of curb cutting your dashboard. So you recognize the exclusion of your audience. In this particular case, let's say we have somebody who's visually impaired and you solve for one. Maybe you use those big numbers that are also color contrast. There's a high contrast there between the number and the background. So that's going to help them, but it extends to many, right? So now you've got somebody who needs their attention called to these numbers because maybe they just like get overwhelmed with dashboards or small, numbers in the dashboard. So you're calling the attention and you're helping somebody understand what's important. So even if somebody had a little bit of a comprehension issue with the domain knowledge or with that subject, you're helping them understand it. And so that's why bands KPIs are really great because you can solve for one, but extend to many. You should also be consistent with your conventions. So consistently use titles and headers and subheaders. Like I didn't realize it until I tried some screen reader testing. That's super important because that means something to a screen reader. Having a title, like that's the header one, and having the worksheet title is like a header two. And screen readers read that, whereas what we see on the screen, like if you are sighted and you have good vision and you can see it on the screen, it might look like text to you, but it's a header to the screen reader. So that's really important. And so one of my takeaways after I made that mistake in a visualization was that I tried to keep the titles to my worksheets, and I always make sure I have a dashboard title. Use consistent color. So that way you know what blue means. If blue means central, it means blue central everywhere. And then also apply conventions. So these things that we have been taught, like small typically means less. It could mean less in size, or it could mean less in color. That also is helpful when creating an accessible data experience. And so when people reverse that and they put like a small number, but it has more saturated color, like it's breaking the pattern, but it also adds on to like the workload that our brain has to do in order to understand what it actually means, because we've been conditioned for this convention. So you want to stick with that because it helps people understand. And then consistently apply your layout so people know what to expect, and it'll help them focus. So, you know, if your filters are all on the same side, that's where they are. People then become conditioned to saying, okay, I know my filters are here. So, and I know that there's a header and a footer, so I can like focus in on the middle. And then you want to provide choice. So accessible visualizations are ones where users can complete the task, reading the visualization or understanding the experience in multiple ways. So an example of this could be including a mouse navigation, so you could click, or keyboard navigation. And then provide alternative ways alternative ways of presenting the data. So make the data available to them, so that way they have access to it. That's great for screen readers as well, because the screen reader will go in and if the data is enabled, you can read the table. Or in some cases, just having the data available lets people go in and inspect it, understand it in their own way. Back in like 2015, I think it was, Jack McKinley talked at Tapestry in Annapolis, Maryland. And during that, he had this talk, I think it was called like Data Sushi. And it was like, you've got this beautiful dashboard, but expose the inside piece, and that's the data. And so I always think about Data Sushi when I have that, making the data available. All right, and then you want to prioritize content. So focus on the most important things. Use that FRZ pattern, and then use bands like we talked about to draw attention to the key metrics. And so at this point, you might be thinking, well, Emily, this just sounds like good data visualization practice, right? And it is. Using those best practices can also help with accessibility. And you'd be surprised at people who go, well, that's just best practice. Well, yeah, but there are tons of dashboards out there that aren't best practice or even good practice. So that's why I keep talking about it, because if we get closer to that data, those data visualization best practices, our dashboards will also be more accessible. So here's a little case study for you. We've got the Superstore executive dashboard. Now, I actually picked this case study, I picked this example because it's not egregious. It's like what you might expect or what you might see out there in the wild from an everyday person. So it's not something where the screen reader's going all over the place. It doesn't have like 27 colors on one worksheet and 32 on another. It's just like normal. So there are some issues though with this executive dashboard. And the way that I found these issues is by using Chartability. Now, I love Chartability so much. Frank Elvasky created this, and I tell him, I'm like, I love it so much and I talk about it all the time. I should get a referral fee. And he's like, well, then it's a good thing. It's free. And it is. But what he's done is he has put together Chartability is the website, but you can also navigate down and there's the Chartability workbook. And it's right now in like a Word document, but I've put it into Google Sheets for myself. So let me see here, because I think I have it right behind here. Yeah. So I went through the Superstore executive dashboard and I completed Chartability. Now, what Frank has done is he has gone over the core principles, which are those 4 principles that you find in WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I believe that's the acronym. And so POUR is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And he's put that together just for data visualization or data experiences, whereas WCAG is just general. And so this was a nice way to help data visualization practitioners. And so I went through that, that dashboard, and I completed each of these items just for POUR. Now Frank takes it a bit farther, and he has the CAF, which is compromising, assistive, and flexible. And I think that that's great if you want to extend it, but a lot of times I'll just keep it to POUR because I want people to focus on that part first and then go on to the CAF part of it, the CAF. Okay, so let me go back to my, here we go. All right. So here's a summary of my findings. I won't go through each line by line, but just to summarize, the text is too small in various areas of that dashboard. It needs to be 12 point or higher. Now, I tweeted this out the other day. The default for the body of text, I believe, and maybe like the filter titles, some of that is 9 point. And I wish Tableau would, at minimum, take it to 12 or let us define our own defaults. But really, it does need to be 12 point because that is what has been determined to be like the best font for the best minimum size font for readability. That's not a legal requirement, but that's just based on some of the work that people have done. So that's the industry guideline is 12 point. Color is the only encoding for the map. So here's the issue with only encoding with color is that screen readers can't read color, which on the surface you might be like, okay, cool. But here's the thing that really just was like, oh my gosh, I have to unlearn some of the things I learned. I don't know if you've ever noticed this or if you've learned this too, but you know this trick about coloring the words in your title or subtitle or some of your text to make it like the legend? I did that all the time. I was like, oh, items in blue, and it would be the color of blue, are X, and items in orange, with the color orange, are Y. Here's the issue. Screen readers can't read that. So some people can, but it just blew my mind that that trick that I had been taught for efficiency, and that way you don't have to have the color legend, that color legend is actually super helpful. That was something that, again, these are little like aha moments that I have, but that just blew my mind that some of this like don't double encode, some of the things I learned, I had to step back and say, well, wait a minute, should I actually double encode? Should I actually have that legend to make it more readable? Viz and tooltips are inaccessible. So in that map, there's a Viz and tooltip, it covers like part of the map. That's not great either, but the tooltips are inaccessible to screen readers and keyboard nav. Like you can't like tab into the tooltip. So that's an issue. Instructions aren't provided on how to interact with the dashboard. So it's cool that the map, if I click on a state, then it'll filter everything else. And my dashboard or my worksheet titles change when it does that. But how do I know to actually click on the map? So you've got to provide those instructions. And then the slider filters aren't available for use with keyboard navigation. I've actually just sent a message into the Tableau, some devs about this, because I don't know if people know this or not, but this has been my experience with like 3 visualizations where I've tried the keyboard navigation and I can't access the slider. And so if you're using a date range and you want to slide to get those dates, how are you supposed to do that? How are you supposed to modify your dates? So that's a question I have out to them. So I was thinking about, oh, by the way, let me just show you before I get into this workflow. I want to show you in case you're like, that's cool, Emily, but how do I test for this? No, I'm not going to cover screen reader testing because personally, well, there's 2 reasons. One is I use VoiceOver for Mac. And what I learned is that VoiceOver, that screen reader, is very much an Apple kind of product where it helps you out. So the experience that you have on a Mac for the VoiceOver on Mac may be different and probably will be different than what you may have on JAWS for Windows, or I think it's NVDA, which is another screen reader for Windows. So I don't feel comfortable enough demonstrating that, so I won't, but there are some resources out there for screen readers. Okay, so how do you test for this keyboard navigation? Again, Frank taught me this, so I want to share it because I was like, oh, this is easy. So you just click maybe like by your name or the title, and then you just start to tab. And the tab should go everywhere where you can interact with the dashboard. So you can see if I clicked now, or if I hit enter now, I could edit. I can interact with all of these things. All right, so it skipped. Okay, there we go. It went into the executive overview because this is a worksheet. And then I lost my tab focus, which is not good. But here we go. Now I am in the map. You can see with this light blue border. And so just as a heads up, I was creating a dashboard where I had borders around, and it became very confusing because I was using thin borders. It became very confusing where the tab was, where the keyboard focus was, and where the borders were. And so now I've tabbed over and I'm at the region filter. And if I want to enter that filter, I can click return, and then I can use my pointer arrows up and down. I'll just filter that for West. But you see where the tab, where the keyboard focus went, it went down to monthly sales by segment. It completely skipped over order date and profit ratio filters. So that's an issue to me. So I have a message into them to see how, like, what the workaround is and what the suggestion is there, and if it's a known issue. And then if I tab over again, it goes over to the monthly sales by product category. And then again, that Tableau sparkle with the Tableau word, that is to take me to their web page, their home site. So that's how you can test for keyboard navigation. So we've seen that this dashboard has some issues because the slider filter doesn't work. It seems to lose focus a couple of times. I will say that Tableau actually has made some improvements where if you are developing in, I think it's 2021.3 or higher, it will like adjust the tab order focus. Like it'll make sense. It'll go from like left to right, top bottom, top down. So that's a big improvement because it used to be just like however you put it on the dashboard, which is crazy. Because if you think about how you build dashboards, sometimes you build it, then you take stuff off and then you rearrange things. It's a mess. All right, so if I get back to the workflow. So here's what I think about. I think about like knowing the WCAG guidelines. You could go to WCAG. I've got that resource in the slide deck, which I'll share out for y'all. Know your audience. So I think about start with WCAG, then adjust for my audience. If I know my audience doesn't need a screen reader, like I know it, not like I believe it, but I know it, then maybe I don't have to worry about the screen reader aspect. Then you develop your dashboard or your visualization. I didn't go through all the steps, so prototyping would be in there as well. And then check for accessibility, like go through Chartability, go through the tabbing yourself to see what it looks like. Get user feedback. And this is where you can do those user interviews, observations to get the feedback that impacts accessibility. And then iterate, then check for accessibility again. Show your users if you need to, and then publish. And so that's how I think about the workflow. It doesn't have to be intrusive, but there are some things that if we think about like just what to do, high contrast, like we can build it from the start and that can be part of our MVP. I also think it's really helpful to create a culture of accessibility. So I will tell you, at Red Hat, where I work currently, I have a psychological safety to come out as somebody with a chronic illness. I come out as somebody who has fibromyalgia. At my last, when the last time I worked for somebody, I did not have that safety. I'm pretty sure that would have been held against me, informally or informally. So having psychological safety is really important. And part of that is recognizing that we're humans and not widgets, and that people with differences provide perspective. That really should be the mindset. As part of that, accessibility is part of the MVP. And you may have to take steps to get there, because part of it's learning of like what we need to do to make it part of the MVP. And I also think you include accessibility in your style guides. Like that's creating this culture. And that's how you can affect change organizationally. I also say, somebody asked me the question, like, if we just include accessibility in our style guide, does that cover us? I think it helps, but I think people still need to understand it, because it's just like, know the rules and then you can bend them. So like know how you make accessible dashboards, but in addition to knowing how, like knowing why, because I think that that's helpful. All right, so here are some practical tips. Ensure your colors are distinguishable and have a high contrast. Use a contrast checker. I just actually started using one from the TPGI group. I have resources at the back of the slide deck, so you'll have links to it. Select a readable font. Verdana is a good choice. It's a good web safe font. Use 12-point font for the body of text, axes, etc. Use space. I think Robert was talking about, including space between the data elements. That's really important. It helps, like a screen reader, like for a stacked bar, it helps a screen reader distinguish between the two. It helps others as well, instead of just this blend that looks like one bar. And that's a 1 pixel border between data elements. And use double encoding, like arrows in color. For dexterity, make it accessible with a keyboard. And some people may need a switch. It's like there are different types of switches. Like Stephen Hawking had one. There's like I think it's called a sip and puff, where that will help your audience navigate with the keyboard. The bottom line on this is for switches is make it keyboard navigable, and that should cover you. But double check. And then reduce the amount of clicks needed to get to the insight. Like that sounds like great practice, right? Like we should be doing that because we want our users to get to that insight. That's part of, a lot of times that's part of our job, but it's not just because it's good and we should do it and it's good for efficiencies and getting, making those data informed decisions, but it's also helpful for somebody who has a chronic illness, or it helps people comprehend it. There's less to comprehend. And then for comprehension, if it works for the data, use a highlight color instead of the full color palette. Focus on the most important metrics, create space. Don't have a dense dashboard. Like you don't have to put everything in the kitchen sink in this dashboard. Give the data room to breathe. Give the message the room to breathe. Focus on one story and one question. Don't try to tell multiple stories or answer multiple questions in one dashboard. It's okay to use that navigation button or to use that dashboard action to go to another dashboard. And keep it simple and consistent. So I've got 10 resources here. Chartability, the webaim.org, which is just good for having some accessibility guidelines. The WebAIM color contrast checker, that's what I've used in the past. A link to the TPGI color contrast checker. I included this. I was working on a Team USA dashboard, and the requirement was to make it accessible. And so they were using TPGI, and it's great because it's a client, like a light client application. So it sits on your desktop, you open it up, and you can use a color picker to select your colors or enter the hex codes. And then there's the list of short list of resources. This DataViz Ally resource shortlist is also on the Chartability website. I also included here Domino's website, the Domino's website accessibility lawsuit, because Domino's was sued because their website was inaccessible, and their kind of workaround was for people to call. But what they found was that calling is not the same experience as ordering online. And so I wanted to share that because that's a private, that's a company. It's not the federal government, but they had an accessibility issue and they had to fix it. And so this, Robert's quote, or the quote that Robert put at the beginning of his presentation, that same thing, whether it's design or accessibility, it's like, do it up front because it can cost you a lot later. I've also included the Section 508 website, which is for the US. Section 508 was updated a couple years ago to align to WCAG level 2 standards, which is generally what people go for. And then there's a couple of articles I've included here on inclusive design and accessibility and 10 ways to improve your data visualizations. I think that one's by Juice Analytics. So that's what I've got. Thank you so much. Let's connect. I've got my Twitter and LinkedIn here. And if you have questions, you can ask them now or later. So I'll take a pause and a drink here and turn it over to Sean or Lucas.
Emily, thank you so much for your talk today. We do have a couple questions on the Q&A box if you want to take a look at those. But I
Sure.
think all these points that you brought up, like a very common one that we always hit is the whole, we talked about it with Robert as well, just color blindness, such a simple one that we tend to overlook with the traffic signals dashboards where we just don't consider it or don't wear the other person's shoes, right? And walk their walk. So because we don't see that impact us, we just don't, not everybody, of course, but we have that tendency to just overlook and design to whatever looks good, which sometimes is not accessible, like you've mentioned. So I think this has been a great talk, very eye-opening, at least for me, and I'm sure for many others here in our group. So not sure if you got a chance to look at those questions there, but I'll give you some time to review.
So give me a second because I will pull up the visualization that we worked on that I was working with Tableau on for Team USA. So I'll try to pull that up really quickly so that way you can see what it looks like, what a good visualization looks like. And again, the issue is that you're not going to have 100% accessible dashboard if you have a wide, varied audience. And this is what really hit home to me because I was in a working group and we were using a Jamboard and we were putting like sticky notes up there and somebody was like, oh gosh, there's like way too much, it's overwhelming. And somebody else was like, oh, well, I actually need the color to, and this was like an accessibility working group. And somebody was like, I need the color to help me focus in. And that's how I like organize it. And that to me was just another piece of evidence of it's really hard to do 100%. So you just get as close as you can. So I'll try to real quick to get that dashboard so that I can show you what we did. And then Verdana was used as a good font, but you were told that the Tableau font and Arial were possibly the only fonts that were available to all Tableau users. I'd have to double check on that because I think we have Verdana. If it ships with Tableau, then you have then it's available. And if it's not in Tableau, I would also I'll send a message and say, put it in because we do. Cause like I didn't go into fonts, but like there are issues with, there's a few things to look at with fonts. One is imposter letters. So I's and L's are a great example. There's mirroring. So what do the B's and the D's look like? And then, or P's and Q's, for example, and then the spacing. So I think Arial, if I'm remembering a little image I've used in the past, Arial doesn't have as much space. It's like Arial to Homa and then Verdana. So Verdana has a little more spacing in the characters. So I'd have to look because I know I use Verdana at work and I'm pretty sure that it's shipped with the Tableau, but yeah, if possible, I'll use Verdana. If it ships with it, it's available to use. Okay, but thank you for that question. And then I will find that dashboard, or I'll try to find it real quick and I'll put it in the chat thread for folks.
Awesome. Let me see if we had anything else that came through. I don't think so. If only Tyler had it. Yes, I agree, Robert. That's a good point. Well, guys, I wanted to thank you both, Robert and Emily, for your time today. This has been very good content. I hope people appreciate it as well. I'm sure they did. For those that attend the meeting, for the regular attendees of the Kansas City Tableau user group, like I said, we're going to meet on May 2nd. That is going to be our next meetup. So we will let you know once we have our attendee, our guest list figured out. Please be on the lookout for a get together in April, as we are wanting to celebrate Sean's biggest accomplishment now within the Tableau space. So more to come on that. And that's about all we had today. So thanks for joining us. And I see Emily just posted her link. So for you, John, I think that we're asking for it. There's a the resource right there. And as a quick reminder, please make sure you sign up for TC tomorrow if you're planning on attending. Emily, did you want to have any closing thoughts?
Actually, if I can share my screen again, because I'll just show you
Go for it.
quick some of the elements and some of the design considerations we used. And I can talk through kind of that process and the feedback we got. So we went, so the first iteration of this dashboard had a lot of, it had like overlapping circles. It was, so like the data elements didn't have that space, that 1 pixel space border between them. There were icons used, but you needed to know what the icons were. And you didn't know how to navigate, and the screen reader and tabbing wasn't working very well. So in this particular case, what we did, and then things were floating, but like you couldn't access the data, and there was an image in the background and it just kept saying that it was on an image. They were going to show each athlete's profile, so a picture of them, but they didn't alt text the image. So what it came out was like headshot _ 9.18 instead of saying like Abby Durkin, which that wasn't what her photo was labeled, but you couldn't read a lot of that information. So what we did was we made it very clear. Some of this was information that Team USA wanted in there, but we had the sport. So we included, this is for the Paralympians. So we have the number. So we've labeled the bars so that way people can easily see. These icons are considered decorative. So the reason why we can use them as decorative is because we have the label for what corresponds to these icons just above it. So you don't really need the icons. If you're needing the icons to do something, then the icons have to be described. So these are considered decorative icons. We do have the ability to click for more, to learn more about each sport. So it takes you to the Team USA page. Again, the color contrast here, we checked these out. We used a very light background and used 2 colors that were contrasting against each other, but then also contrasted on the background. And you can see that we have some borders here on these stacked bars. So that way you can distinguish the 2 elements of that bar. And again, everything is labeled. We also showed that the states are ranked by the number of athletes represented on the roster. So that way people understood how they were ranked. And down at the bottom here, we have, the instruction, even though I probably would have put it up top, but now that I think about it, but click on any of the bars to filter the other charts in the dashboard and then click again to reset. So we're giving them instruction on how to use the visualization. So this works for people who can click in, who can see the tooltips. The tooltips aren't giving you any other information besides what the bar and the label are showing you. So this is just one example of a more accessible dashboard. So I hope that was helpful.
Oh, that's awesome to see.
Yeah, I know
the concepts here
the
being
Olympic
applied.
rings are overlapping circles.
Yes.
So thanks for asking that and for giving me the space, the time to be able to show you this dashboard.
Yeah. Our pleasure, Emily. Well, guys, thank you very much. Please reach out to Emily and Robert if you guys have any other questions. Their social media contact is available. This meeting was recorded, so it will be available on YouTube, I would say by no later tomorrow. So if you missed anything, you can always go back in and catch up on it. And that's it. So you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see each other again in about a month and a half. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.